Welcome to an introduction to directing in Cambridge Theatre from the Marlowe Society. Thank you all so much for coming. If you're a fresher, and if you're not a fresher as well, it's very cool to see so many people interested in directing and Cambridge Theatre and so forth. So hopefully you'll find this useful. The point of this session is basically to demystify the world of Cambridge Theatre, the world of how directing works, because it can be a little misty sometimes, and directing in particular, it can seem like sort of obvious how you get involved in acting and writing sometimes, but how to start directing can seem a little bit more unclear. So hopefully we will fully demystify that throughout tonight. So this follows on from our writing event last night. So if you came along to that, hello again. You may hear some of the same spiel, apologies, but if you didn't, that's fine, because it was recorded and you can check it out on our YouTube channel, and this one is also being recorded, and will also go up on our YouTube channel in the next few days. So just like housekeeping stuff, I've got some pre-submitted questions from some of you guys already, as well as a few of my own, but if you come up with any questions during the Zoom, then just pop them in the big chat, and we'll get to them at the end. Yeah, and as I said, yeah, please do keep yourselves muted and your videos off, just because it would make everything easier. Cool. So before we get around to introducing each of us, I just want to say a bit about the Marlowe Society, which is putting on this event. Marlowe is one of the theatrical societies in Cambridge. We've been going since 1907. Some of our alumni include people like Ian McKeown, Derek Jacobi, Rachel Weitz, Sam Mendes, Tom Hiddleston, etc., all sorts of people like that. We act as a funding body. We fund other people's shows, but we also mainly stage our own regular productions, events and workshops such as this. So every year we put on the Marlowe Arts Show, which is where a student team is paired up with a professional theatre director to stage a Shakespeare play. We put on BME Shakespeare, which is a Shakespeare production with an all BME cast and crew. And if you're interested in that and you're BME, then applications are open for that now. We also put on the Marlowe Showcase, which is where 12 to 14 graduating actors have the chance to perform before agents and casting directors and other industry professionals, which is really exciting. And we also produce Hatch every term, which is a night of new student writing and directing. And this Michaelmas will be online. And if you want to check out the previous Hatch online from Easter term, then you can go also check that out on our YouTube channel. Lovely. So that's Marlowe. My name's Jasper, by the way, but I'll introduce myself properly later. And let's go away with introducing the panel. Over to you, Jamie.
Hi there. My name is Jamie, and out of everyone on this panel, I'm the only one that is not a student. So I'm not representing a student society. I'm a staff member at the university. I manage the ADC Theatre. So that is the venue that puts on various shows. It's not the only venue in Cambridge. There's also often college venues and things like that, although the situation with the pandemic has caused many of them to close and severely limited that. We had to close in March and have managed to begin to reopen this autumn from next week as a socially distanced venue, and we're going to be live streaming our shows. We also usually have another venue called the Corpus Playroom, which has sadly had to close as well and is currently still closed, although we're making plans and moves to hopefully reopen it in the new year, although because it is a much smaller venue with a much smaller stage, the kind of shows that we could put on are far more limited, and we expect to probably be a cast size of only 1 to 2 people. In terms of kind of my journey here, I used to be a student quite a while back. I was a student between about 2013 and 2016. I mainly did stuff that wasn't directing. I did kind of producing and backstage stuff. I directed once or twice. I directed for an event called Smorgasbord, which is lots of little bits and pieces of plays that are put on, and they're doing that online this coming term. And I co-directed an ADC late show in my final year. My job now, along with the kind of aspects of managing the theatre, is to be part of the panel that helps to choose the shows that are put on. So what we do is we program or choose the shows 1 season in advance. So the spring season coming up, I'm going to be opening the applications for it next Thursday and having that open for 2 weeks. I'm going to put in the chat the link that will have the information and the application form for when applications open. I'm also going to put my email address. The key thing to mention is that while we have these societies, which are all fantastic in terms of developing people, and also they fund the shows that we put on, in terms of the applications for next season, you need not be connected to anything. You need not to have done any theatre before. We're just interested in what your idea may be for a show. So in terms of directing, you might be interested in directing a show that already exists, in which case I would recommend you want to look into whether the performing rights are available for that show, if it's within copyright. Although if it's a particularly old show, obviously over 100 years old, it's out of copyright. Or if it's a bit of original writing, then that may be something that you wish to do. And so what we basically have is, as I've said, we'll have an application process open where people write in what the show is and what their ideas for it is, and then we'll invite people to a video pitch where they explain those ideas further. We might have an interview to ask them some more questions, and basically we're open looking for plays, musicals, drama, anything kind of in between or kind of mixture of them. And I'm really rambling here. I'll wrap up soon, but basically that's the idea. So yeah, we're here, and I've just put my email address and things. So if you have any questions about how the applications process works, drop me an email, but it will inevitably come up throughout the questions that happen this evening. Thank you.
Fab, am I next? I think I am. Hi, I am Jade Franks, and I'm the president of the Cambridge Footlights. We're predominantly a comedy society, and we put on shows for stand-up and sketch acts. In normal times, we'd have at least one show a week, but as Jamie said, the Corpus Playroom is currently closed, so it sadly means that we're doing a few less shows than we usually would be. But we are hoping to kind of make up for it with some online stuff and some like workshops and things like that. So we are still very much functioning and keen to get freshers involved. In terms of my directing experience, I've done pretty much everything from, I co-directed one of the biggest Footlights shows last year called the Spring Review, which happens every year, and that's for graduating Footlights. I've also directed an original musical in my first year, and I also ended up directing myself in a show last year, which was called Bottleneck, and it was about the Hillsborough disaster. And just on that point, and from what Jamie was saying about when you're applying to the ADC with whatever show it is that you might want to put on as a director, I would just say that don't be afraid of putting forward stories that might be a little bit different, or ones that you think a Cambridge audience may not want to hear, because from my experience from doing that show, people absolutely do want to hear stories that they may not have heard before, or that may be a bit different to what their background is. So yeah, that's me. Am I going next? Hi, I'm Una. I'm BREAD co-president. BREAD is a newly established society. It was established last year in 2019. And the main aim of it is to kind of to really put to the forefront narratives that, of BME people, or just about narratives that aren't necessarily seen on stage as often. We are in some ways a funding body, and we do co-fund shows with CUADC often, and then also some shows we also plan to take shows to the Fringe usually, but this year was different obviously. But then at the same time we also host workshops, socials, and other things to get other BME people in Cambridge involved in theatre, putting their own stories forward, and it's an interesting society because it is like very newly established, and we are like have so many ideas right now, and I was just really keen for anyone who's interested to get involved with us for sure, and yeah, keep up with what we're doing. On the side of that, my first show that I was involved in directing was actually a Marlowe show, which was the BME Shakespeare in my first year, Romeo and Juliet, which was like an amazing experience, and really pushed me to want to do more theatre in the future, and particularly BME theatre in Cambridge, which is growing and is becoming more and more popular. But then I assistant directed Bottleneck, which is Jade's show, and then also a few sketch shows and comedy, and also I'm directing Panto this term, which if you're also keen in acting, the audition's closed tomorrow if you're a fresher, so get involved with that if you like, and if not, come and see it, I guess. But yeah, directing is such an interesting process, and when I started at Cambridge, didn't think it would be something that I'd want to do, but it is really enjoyable, and it's a lot of fun.
I think it's me now. I'm Dixie and I am president of the Pembroke Players this year. The Pembroke Players is a drama society that's like attached to Pembroke College, but I'm not from Pembroke. And you don't have to be from Pembroke to get involved in the stuff that we're doing. We normally have a venue called the Cellars, the New Cellars in Pembroke, but it's not very ventilated, so we can't use it during COVID times, but we're still doing lots of stuff. We are looking into outdoor spaces, community churches as venues for smaller shows this year. We're still doing smokers, which are comedy nights, in gardens and things like that, and then also mixing that with some online stuff, some workshops and some opportunities, like we're running a uni-wide playwriting competition this term, which I think the deadline to apply for that is like tomorrow. Don't you know what day we're on? And yeah, I am in second year, so last year, well, I do kind of quite a lot of a mix of stuff. Like I just really enjoy theatre, so I try to get involved in as many different ways as I can, acting, directing, writing. I assistant directed one of the sort of big boy musicals last year, which was a good way of getting into seeing the way that the ADC operates as a theatre. And then I wrote and directed a radio drama over lockdown. And yeah, I guess that's me.
Cool, I think it's me. Hi, I'm Phoebe. I'm the director for CUADC, which is the Cambridge University Amateur Dramatic Club. We're the oldest dramatic club in the UK, I believe. So it's kind of my job on committee to represent all the directors' interests across Cambridge theatre. And yeah, I'm kind of here as a point of advice for anyone who's interested in directing. So yeah, that's kind of my job. CUADC, kind of what we do is, well, the main thing we're doing this term is the Freshers Plays, which will be on week 6, and we have a main show and a late show at the ADC. The applications are open for all roles, so please go and apply, especially for directors. And that just, yeah, the applications of that are very simple. You just get to have a chat with some people on the committee, and it's an amazing thing where all the cast and crew are all freshers, and it's a great way of meeting people. And the plays this year are That Face by Polly Stenham and Second Person Narrative, which are some really good plays. So we're really excited for that. And when I started directing, I did Freshers Play in my year, which was a really great experience for me, and really like was a crash course in how Cambridge theatre worked, which was really great. And then since then, I've kind of done bits and pieces. I've done all sorts. I've done everything from kind of edgy, like postmodern drama to I directed the Lent term musical last term, Guys and Dolls. Assistant directed a lot of stuff as well, mainly at the ADC and Corpus, but some college stuff as well. And yeah, I think that's everything.
Cool. Thanks, guys. Yeah, so I'm Jasper. I'm a second year studying politics and international relations at Johns. I'm the Marlowe new writing officer, which means it's my job to run those hatch nights that I mentioned earlier, which are sort of like Smorgasbord, which Jamie referenced, which is like a night of different short student plays. And I also run the Marlowe Writers Group, which is a weekly writers meetup on Zoom, where writers can meet each other and chat about their work and et cetera, et cetera. So I'm a writer-director across both theatre and film. So I do that. I also do acting and photography and videography and stuff like that. And I, what did I do last term? Last term, I co-directed I wrote and co-directed a Doctor Who spoof called Doctor Whom with the Pembroke Players. I co-wrote and co-directed and co-hosted a panel show also at the Pembroke Players. I wrote, directed and edited a superhero action adventure comedy for the ADC Online season called The Adventures of Sharkman. And then I've got a couple of other shows lined up this term. So we're doing a sequel to The Adventures of Sharkman, The Adventures of Sharkman 2. Co-writing and co-directing an airplane style comedy called Space Mystery, a Mystery in Space, which is going to be the ADC week 7 late show. And then straight after that, we're doing another panel show at the ADC in week 8. We'll be producing another Hatch Night, which will be the Hatch Holiday Special. So advertisements for writers and directors for that will go out shortly. I co-produce Cambridge Shorts, which is the University Short Film Festival. And similarly, applications and announcements regarding that will be going out shortly. And with film, I also, when I was on my gap years, I wrote and directed a feature-length sci-fi film called Tales from the Apocalypse, which you can go watch on Amazon Prime if that is your sort of thing. So yes, lots of writing, lots of directing. I've only ever directed my own stuff rather than adapting things. But yeah, that's us out of the way. I'm going to jump into asking some of the questions which you guys sent in. So thanks very much to everyone who submitted questions. I'm going to ask what I think is, hang on, I had it here, but now my eyes have gone me. Oh yes, here we go. What is probably the simplest and most straightforward question to start with. How is it best to get started in directing in Cambridge theatre? I'm just going to throw that one out to the floor. If anyone has any immediate thoughts to mind, raise your hand of how best to get started, or how you got started. Yeah, Dixie, go.
Well, I think two things. The first thing I think is that watch theatre. So just see as much as you can. There's some stuff like obviously it can be expensive to see lots of theatre, but there's lots of stuff that's for free. Like for example, tickets are free to see the Pembroke Players Smoker and stuff. And it just is amazing because it gives you ideas. It gives you ideas of what you don't want to do and what you do want to do, and things that you want to steer away from and things you want to go towards. So I just think, yeah, just see as much theatre as you can, see what's possible, and strike up conversations with people afterwards as well. Like message people and go, I really liked your show. People are really friendly, and you won't even like, it feels, I remember it feeling so kind of like enclosed, this world of theatre, because everyone sort of seems to know each other. But they only know each other because everyone is so up for getting to know everyone who does it. So you should just really like speak with your chest and say hi to people. A, and B, I just think, especially for directing more than anything else, like you're just never going to feel ready, and you just need to kind of dive in head first. And the best thing about student theatre is that, you know, there's really no real consequences. You might get a bad review in the tab if your play sucks, but like that's fine, we move on, like no one really cares. So just go for it. Don't feel, I know lots of people feel like they need to take a long like run up into it. You just don't need to. Just there's so many resources, just like use them, get going straight off.
Yeah, would echo everything Dixie said. Yes. Does anybody else have thoughts on how they, yeah, Jamie, go.
So if you're thinking you're interested in getting involved, to echo what Dixie said, there should be no feeling that you need to go through some kind of ranks or anything like that, or that you couldn't do so as a first year director. So what I'd recommend doing is keep an eye on vacancies for directing. That is on a website called Camdram, which I'm just going to put in the chat now. And basically shows looking for directors will be advertising on there. Other avenues that exist are, as Phoebe's mentioned, the freshers plays, which are also be advertised on things like Camdram right now. So because the notion of that is to get people brand new, we're not expecting any previous theatrical experience, please do apply for that. Although do be aware there's only 2 shows, and not as, you know, there probably will be a competitive element to it. That said, so that's, and then also in terms of applications, so as I'm saying, the applications that open next week and that open in 2 weeks' time, if you have an idea that's already in your mind of like, oh, I'd love to see this thing on the stage, just send in an application, because it's a learning theatre. It's somewhere where we want people that are new to things to put things on, provided that, you know, the idea sounds interesting, or it's different, or adds kind of variety to the season that we have. That said, it may be that you have just started to think of directing as an idea, you're not 100% sure what that is in relation to theatre, or you kind of want to see how other people do it, in which case the way you may want to do it is to kind of do roles that are assisting in kind of assistant directing. So the word assistant directing has been said quite a few times by other people on this panel. It's how lots of people begin. Once again, on Camdram, you'll see assistant director advertise the thing, and that's a really great way to get involved, because basically you're there to kind of be that extra voice, to kind of be a sounding board for things, but almost like to learn, almost through a mentoring process through someone who may have more experience than you and things like that. And they can even break down to things like associate directing and various things like that. So that's my kind of short answer, which I'm sure will be echoed by many people, is that there's many different ways, basically.
Sorry, I was muted. Yes, Phoebe. Yeah, go.
Sorry, yeah. I'll just echo literally what Jamie said. CUADC have a bunch of mailing lists which will email out the vacancies from CamJam every week. I'll just give you the link to the Get Involved on the CUADC website where all our mailing lists are. Yeah, so that's just a quick way of seeing every week what's going on. And I was going to say something else. Yeah, I'd really recommend assisting. That's how I found I got a lot of experience on ADC shows. And also I think I've pitched for almost every time I've been here. And honestly, pitching is just, by doing it, is a great way to get experience. I've been rejected and I've been accepted. And it makes you like think about why you're doing your show a lot, just doing it. So I'd really recommend, like, even if it seems like you're throwing yourself in at the deep end, just do it. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think it'd be good to still talk about our sort of like respective personal experience with getting involved in directing. So Una, what was your like sort of lead up journey, as it were? Was it through assistant directing as well?
Yeah, it was. So I didn't do anything in my first term at Cambridge. But then my first thing I assistant directed was BME Shakespeare in Lent term of my first year, which was a great experience. It was at the Fitzpatrick Hall theatre, so not the ADC, and it was such a good experience and really got me involved. Like assistant directing, I can't stress enough also how fun it can be, because I feel like you kind of have the best of both worlds of not having to take on everything the director has to think about, but also a really great way to like get completely involved. You're like very core member of the team, and it's so much fun. And then in my third term, I pitched a sketch show for the Corpus Playroom late, and that was a freshers sketch show, which was also a lot of fun and also like a big learning curve in terms of experience as well, because obviously you learn so much about every aspect of things that you have to organize as a director, which again, like you do just have to push yourself to do, and does seem really daunting. It feels like everyone in the world has more experience than you do, but the reason that they know stuff is because they've also been like, they were also learning about it at one point. And then I also, what did I do? So then I went to the Fringe, which was so much fun and really got me involved in theatre. And then back in Cambridge in my second year, I assistant directed the play that Jade directed and was in, which was a one-person play, and again completely different to the sketch show and like the Shakespeare that came before it. And then assistant directed Panto in that same year, which was a lot of fun. So, and then another sketch show, another Footlights sketch show in Lent as well. So quite boring. But my point is that I kind of have like dipped my toe in a lot of different types of directing, which also can be so much fun. So maybe the first time you assistant direct or get involved in a directing team for something, maybe you might realize that that's not for you, and you'd like never really want to, you know, direct a serious drama or one-person show or comedy, but you do just get experience from it anyway, and can be so much fun. And it's so great to see something come together, and like you are very proud of whatever you produce at the end, even though it does seem like a mad scramble for sometimes, some weeks before.
Awesome. Cool. And Jade, would you be able to talk a bit about your sort of way into directing, as it were?
Yeah, of course. Well, mine just seems kind of a bit random, which kind of, I think it proves that there really isn't like a formula to it, or even like a hierarchy in terms of like you have to be doing it for this number of years, or like you can't do it if you're a first year. Because the first thing I did was an original musical that a lad in my college wrote, and then I applied for it as a fresher, and then the show was late October, so it was like such a fast turnaround from starting uni to like directing a show, and I knew nothing about Cambridge theatre or how it worked or anything like that. I was very much like jumped into the deep end, and then I co-directed another musical kind of thing, War of the Worlds, and then I directed Bottleneck, the one that I was in, and then I was meant to be assistant directing the Footlights tour show this year that goes like to the Fringe and around America and stuff like that. So I think, yeah, it's kind of interesting because you may sometimes think that going from like directing loads of stuff and then to assistant directing, it almost seems like it would seem like a step back, but it really isn't. Like it's kind of show by show basis, and yeah, you can kind of apply for just whatever you feel is right or whatever you think you'd enjoy based on what the project is. So yeah, I've kind of done a bunch of random stuff.
Nice. Wait, can you guys hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good. Sorry, I just got a pop up saying my mic malfunctions, and I was like, oh no. Okay, yeah. Anyway, I would echo everything that these guys have said. I'll just briefly give you mine because it's sort of similarly random to Jade's, and that I started last year. Got involved in acting first, and just sort of like made friends through that. Essentially, I was in the Christ College pantomime last year and made friends with the guy who was directing it, and then we were sort of like, oh, we should pitch a show together for next term. And then we ended up pitching the Doctor Who spoof to the Pembroke players, and that got accepted. And we also pitched to co-write and co-direct that, him using the Panto he just directed as experience, and me using the film that I made as experience. And then we got it. And then it's just sort of like rolled on from there, essentially. So I think I might have just disappeared.
You went quiet, sorry.
Yeah, only for a couple of seconds, though.
Only for a couple of seconds. Okay.
Yeah.
My audio quality may dramatically dropped. But yes, it can very much be random. It can very much just be like, oh, I made friends with someone, and then we decided we wanted to do things together, and then we started doing that. Yeah, there are loads of different pathways into it, essentially, is what we're trying to stress. But yeah, I'm gonna jump into another question. This one's interesting. So for those of us who are directors, when you're directing, how do you delegate tasks? So how do you decide what the tasks are and in what order they should be done, and that kind of thing. So getting into the sort of nitty-gritty practical stuff of directing. Dixie, you just directed a musical which is on next week, so I guess this sort of thing might be fresh in your mind if you have any thoughts on it.
I'm so bad at this. I am honestly terrible. I think I have to do everything myself, and then I freak out, and it's terrible. Actually a lot of directors I've met, especially student ones, I feel are not actually very good at delegating tasks. But I think that what's really important is communication. That's what I found, because actually with the show I'm directing, Survival Strategies, it's on next week at the ADC. You should get tickets. Anyway, yeah, I found that having meetings where you very much explicitly go through roles and talk about how you're going to divvy up the roles between the production team is really important, because it's different for every show. Because, most shows will have a similar looking production team. You have a producer, maybe an assistant producer, and then you have maybe a technical director if you're a theatre where you need to rig stuff or you're putting up an extensive set, a stage manager, maybe a deputy stage manager, depending on the scale of the show. But then, all of those people are all wonderful, unique individuals who will all tackle that role in a way that maybe the stage manager of your last show didn't. And so it's never going to get monotonous. But I think just communication is the biggest thing, and massively in COVID times as well, because communication via the internet is so hard, and meetings over Zoom, and just, I hate it so much. But some people love the organization side of directing. It's not my thing at all. But if you love what you're doing, then you just kind of get through that stuff so that you can do the fun stuff. But yeah, my main point is communicate, and also don't just because you're the director doesn't mean you have to be this like perfect person who can do everything and who has time to do everything, and who doesn't like mess up and go, oh god, I've double booked myself, oh god, I've actually got to go and do this thing, oh god, I'm really stressed and I really need to just have some time to myself. You so are allowed to do all of those things. So yeah, try not to like absorb all of the stress of the show. Share it as fairly as you can.
Yeah, agreed. Yes, Phoebe, is that a hand? No. Oh, you just, it's not. Okay, never mind.
Sorry,
Never mind.
I'll talk about producers though. Producers, the wonderful things that are producers.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully if you're lucky enough to get one, these amazing people will come and organize your show for you, and it's actually a blessing. Because I find the organization, the idea of rehearsing a show and dealing with all your actors and then also organizing an entire prod team is overwhelming. And luckily, if you're at the ADC or Corpus, when it hopefully opens again, they have a very clear production timeline. So it's a really easy way to delegate tasks and say, this has to be done by this time. And your producer will generally manage your amazing production team. So you're still going to be involved because you have to make the artistic decisions. But it does leave you a bit more room to just focus on what's going on in the rehearsal room. So they are sometimes hard to come by though. So if you get one, you're very, very lucky, is all I'd say.
Yeah, echoed on both those notes. I would again just emphasize that like it's not just the director and then a cast, it is the director and a prod team. Like you can divide responsibilities. You can, as has been said, you can have assistant directors, you can have co-directors, so you're sort of like splitting responsibilities 50-50, and just echoing the communication point as well, just like making clear what each of you are going to do. And I think directing can be such a sort of like highly personalized and different experience for different people, and some directors may find it easier to massively delegate, and it is a sort of like big communal collaborative team-led effort. Some directors may prefer to sort of like delegate less and be like, I'm fine with not delegating, and I can handle it, and as long as everyone's okay with that, that's cool, and that is also fine. I think it's just like finding a way which works for you and which works for the crew and the cast that you've got is very important. Oh yes,
I wanted to say as well, if you like are interested in directing and don't know where you like get this team from, the link that Jamie sent for CamDram, even if you're not like interested in these roles, look at what the other roles are, or just click on a random production and see who they have on their team, and then like try and piece together like what those mean and like what those people's roles, like for example, like a deputy stage manager or like a stage manager actually does, and then you can find out kind of more about how the prod team side comes together, which is always so important. And when you are directing or producing, like getting all of that team together is really useful. But definitely what Phoebe said about getting a producer who's very on it is always a treat, because they're very much organized. And also, if you're interested in producing and you sound like you enjoy like the most organizational parts of it, or kind of like bringing a team together, and definitely like a leadership role in trying to piece all of the like contact all of the different people who are in the show, and check on how they're doing, get involved with that too. But yeah, definitely just like look at the roles, like even if you're not interested in them, just so you know like what they do.
Yes, Dixie, go for it.
This is just a little thing I just thought of, but I think that sometimes you have the sort of the directors, and the director and the assistant director are in the room and create such a attachment to the show. And I think that sometimes with the blur of life at Cambridge, it's really easy for the other members of the production team not to be as involved in the rehearsal process. And I think that obviously it's difficult these days because rehearsal space is limited and rules of 6 and things like that. But I think when you can, a really good way of delegating work is to make sure that the prod team are really invested in the show you're putting on. So invite lighting designers to sit in on rehearsals, invite the people who are designing the set to sit in on rehearsals, invite the producer to sit in on rehearsals. I mean, if they love the show and they love the actors and they want to do a good job for the show, whereas if it's this kind of mysterious thing that they're making spreadsheets for, they probably won't do as sort of thorough a job, or like they probably will work hard at it, but everyone just works harder at things that they care about. So yeah, I would really recommend hooking them in, making them really care.
Oh yes, Jamie. Yeah.
It's a little bit tangential to the question, but I just wanted to add a bit more onto what Una was talking about, which is basically, as I was kind of saying in terms of applications for at the ADC and Corpus Playroom, we're most interested in the pitch for the show and what directorial ideas you have for it. So if it's like, okay, I have a production of X show and I'm going to change the setting of it, or like whatever you want to do it, or you're like, I don't want to change the setting, I want to do it completely as it usually is, and the text will like, you're kind of interested in hearing what process you want to take with it. But what we're not as interested in is we're not expecting a budget in terms of funding and things like that. That is to come, and we're not expecting you to know if you have other members that you're like, oh, I know who was going to be my producer, and that's worked out in the core team, or it's an original bit of writing from someone someone that's written, so it's writer and director applying together, then great. But we're not expecting a team assembled. We're not necessarily expecting you to know what that kind of structure is. As I said, I'm a staff member, and the ADC has a few staff members, and there's one person's job to basically oversee the entire production process from beginning to end. So at the point that your show is chosen, you basically are told, cool, okay, if you've never done this before, you probably want to advertise for a producer, a stage manager, and all of these roles, which can sound a bit mysterious if you've never done anything that's related to theatre before. So that's, I think what I want to say. Obviously, college theatre is fantastic as well, because students are fantastic at supporting things as well and supporting each other. But I just want to kind of make clear that you don't feel like you need to know what all these theatre roles are. You just want an idea and something that you want to do with it at the point that you apply.
Yes, absolutely. Would echo everything Jamie said and everything everyone else has said. You will naturally pick up these things as you make your way through Cambridge Theatre and your time here. And before you know it, you'll be like, oh, I have so much experience, and I don't even know where all this came from. Another question, which we sort of covered, but I'll sort of take in a different direction. Does directing come as a seniority thing, or can people in any year group direct? So as we covered, you can direct in any year group, and you can definitely direct in your first year. But with regards to it being a seniority thing, something I would say is that you absolutely can jump straight into directing, as like Jade did, for example. But something which I also think is really useful is just like having experience of different roles in a production, because that can make the job of being a director much easier. So for example, I mentioned that I also act. So like most of the shows I did last term, I was acting, and then I'm also acting in some stuff this term. And I think like a huge part of the job of the director is just directing actors and like making sure that the actors are, giving the best performance that they can and bringing the character to life and, meshing well together and that kind of thing. And that's much easier to do if you yourself have acted and know how that sort of dynamic works. And similarly to other production roles, maybe it's absolutely not your thing and you never want to be a producer and you hate organization, and that's cool. I'm also like that. But yeah, I think it can be good to just have a knowledge of different parts of the production process in theatre, so that when you're directing and you're sort of like overseeing a whole production, as it were, you yourself know what it's like to be in those different roles and know what it's like to be on the other end, I suppose. But yeah, I don't know if anyone else has any sort of thoughts on that kind of thing or experience with that. Yeah, Phoebe.
I mean, I'm very much a one-trick pony. I only do directing, so I can't really speak from experience. But I also, in terms of technical roles, there's stuff like ASMing at the ADC, which is really easy to do, and you just kind of figure out how backstage works a bit. So I'd really recommend, and shows are always looking for people like that. So if you just kind of want to have something to say when you next apply to direct something, like, oh, I've been in the theatre and I kind of know what this looks like, I kind of know how this works. If you're applying to AD or just like applying to pitch, they'll really, yeah, thanks Jamie, sorry. They'll really value that insight, I think, is what I'd say. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Did anybody else have any thoughts on that sort of thing before we moved on? No, cool. Another question we had was about, get interesting. This is something we sort of also touched on last night, but I think would be good to cover again. So are there any types of plays that are more suited to Cambridge theatre than others? So I would quickly say that I think Cambridge students and people who come and watch shows at the ADC and other venues are just, like everyone else, like at the end of the day, we will just want to see like good theatre. And that can be all kinds of shows, all kinds of stories, that sort of thing. But at the same time, I would also say that it can be important to basically know your audience and know what kind of audience is going to be coming. If you're, I don't know, if, for example, I would use a specific example. So for example, with Hatch Online, at the end of Easter term last year, when I was selecting which plays were going to be used in that, the sort of like dynamic which eventually produced was about sort of like not necessarily all comedic, but like less dark plays, which I ended up choosing. And that was because I just thought that those were the plays which ultimately worked the best together. So it worked the best as a single night of theatre, but also because it was the end of a really weird, sort of quite depressing term. And I sort of decided that I felt people might appreciate a sort of like slightly lighter like term kappa, as it were. So it was right at the end of Easter term online, after a really interesting term with regards to theatre and lots of people trying out new kinds of theatre. So yes, I would say know your audience and know what kind of like audience you want to attract to watch your show. But yeah, at the end of the day, it is just about telling the best story possible. Jamie, do you have your hand up? Yes.
Yeah, so I kind of wanted to make a distinction because I think there's bits of this question, but I think the thing I want to make most clear, I hope is the case for the program we do at the ADC and the Corpus Playroom, is there's not this sense of like, this is what a Cambridge show should be, whatever that is. Jade made an excellent point earlier, which is to go and to apply and put things on that you think are maybe underrepresented, that aren't typically done. And I think that the student societies have done an excellent job within the last few years of really diversifying the amount and various forms of theatre, agencies of the creators and things like that. So I think that's the key thing to say, that if you don't make that jump to put things on because you have this kind of preconception of, oh, this is what is being looked for, then it won't happen, which would be a huge shame. That said, I think the key things that in terms of maybe what is looked for are specifics, the kind of logistics of the slots, which I'll talk about in a second. So the key thing is to just ensure that it is a show that you can legally put on. So there's a few main rights holders, especially in social distancing times, it's kind of limited to just a few. I'll be putting those links to what those rights holders are when I open applications, but you can always email me as well if you have any questions. But don't apply to put on Hamilton because you're never going to get it. Like, just stuff like that. Or are currently running, or not so much running, musical in Broadway or things like that. In terms of the slots I was talking about, so right now we have ADC main shows, which are slots that are happening at 7:45, and ADC late shows, which happen at 11 p.m. In terms of time, the 7:45 show is usually somewhere between 2.5 hours and 2 hours 45 minutes. So that's usually a kind of long show, the kind of thing you may go to a theatre and see an interval in between. Because of the late night nature of the ADC late show, it has to be shorter. It has to be 1 hour and 15 max long. So that would be a factor that would affect whether we program something there or not if the script is too long, or we may say the script needs cutting if it's like original or things like that, if that's a possibility. At the Corpus Playroom, we usually have 2 slots, which is main and late, one at 7 and one at 9:30. This is all very early and we're working it out as a team, but it's most likely that we're only going to be able to have the main slot available at the Corpus Playroom. So it's a 7 p.m. show that is, again, 2 hours max. You can have an interval at the Corpus Playroom, so it can be kind of standard theatre, but the key thing is that the stage is much, much smaller. And then the other layer of logistics, which unfortunately has become the case in the world we are right now, is the situation with social distancing. So the current law, especially it's amateur performance, we can't do anything like the professional world can, where you can get actors to team together and live in the same house and things like that. Everyone must be socially distanced. So if we receive a pitch for a show that is, 2 hours of just fighting or 2 hours of an intimate scene, we need to know either that they're going to do it in kind of an abstract interpretive way that means they are still socially distanced, or realize that it's probably not something we can currently stage. And so that's really the kind of key factor that for shows at the ADC for the next season, presuming that restrictions remain as they are, we can't have a cast size of above 12 people because of the rule of 6 and things like that. And at the Corpus Ferium, as I said, it looks like it can't be above 2 people. So that's very much a thing that would affect that.
Yes, Una.
I just wanted to say something about like Bread and what we do. So the idea of like theatre being a specific thing, or Cambridge theatre audiences only wanting to see a specific thing, is very much a myth, and also a myth that Bread is always trying to dispel. So we do currently just put on BME narratives. So anything that's written by or would be a predominantly big cast of BME people is what we like, just because there seems to be a gap for it and a space for it. And in Lent term, so the last kind of normal term of Cambridge Theatre, Bread had like plenty of shows on, from like ADC main shows to late shows at Corpus, new writing, and really just trying to put to the forefront kind of writing that maybe Cambridge audiences haven't seen, and which make it like more refreshing in a way that it doesn't have to be also a BME show that is interesting and refreshing and puts on a different narrative. But I think generally most people want to see shows that have something new about them, something different to them. So whether that's like adapting a classic to be completely different, and that's the draw that you're trying to bring to the show, or it's something that no one's ever heard about, or something that you really care about and you think that people should get to know about and care about, and a play that you're really keen to put on or to write. There's no limits to what you can do and what we want to see. And if you want to see it and if you want to put it on, there's a good chance that lots of people want to watch it, and they will come and watch it too. So yeah.
Yes, Phoebe.
Just say also, I think, well, I'm kind of speaking for the ADC here, sorry, Jamie, but as in, often the ADC won't programme shows that have been on an ADC venue in the last 5 years or so, maybe a bit less. So yeah, so if you go on CamDram again, you can see what shows have been on. And that does kind of often mean that every 5 years the same shows will come on. So that even more so, I would recommend finding something that hasn't been done before, or something you can do a really original spin on. And like there are more and more plays that that you can find and have, especially now in COVID times, you can have online access to, and you can read way more stuff. So I'd recommend doing new things.
Yeah, Dixie.
I also think that types of theatre extends past just like the kinds of scripts you choose to your actual process as a director, and material that maybe isn't scripted, material that maybe is silent, that includes other mediums. Physical theatre is all stuff that I personally, and I think is a big mission for the Pembroke Players this year, is that's stuff we want to see more of in Cambridge Theatre. And I think that there's just like a really shared excitement and kind of welcoming in of more experimental theatre in general. That's what I felt, at least over the last year, of everyone that I've come in contact with on the scene. So yeah, if that's the kind of thing you're interested in, then you should definitely get in contact with us, because we're definitely interested. But also I'm sure other venues would be very interested if you wanted to go down one of those routes. And if it sounds interesting but it also sounds I don't know, scary, and like you don't know even what to do with that, I would really recommend also just like brushing up a bit on some theatre practitioners, getting some ideas of like just the scope of what processes you can go through, because there are so many, and there are so many that will suit different kinds of people. So I'd really recommend looking up Frantic Assembly and looking at the kinds of shows they make and their rehearsal process, because their rehearsal process is very different than the sort of classic working with a script and then going off book and then blocking the scenes and all of that. And I would recommend looking up Jacques Lecoq and Katie Mitchell for just a kind of varied theories on how theatre can work. And I know Katie Mitchell's book, The Director's Craft, is really, really good for people who want to try out a very meticulous directing style with a often quite naturalistic script, and it's really great. It breaks down steps for you that you can follow. So just there's loads of resources out there, and there's loads of like just stuff to research and look into. You don't have to kind of make it up as you go along if you don't want to. Some people like doing it just their own way, but there are so many people out there that you can like one show try out their style, one show try out their style, and see what suits you as a director. We just encourage you to kind of be brave and be a bit experimental with, because you might find, oh my gosh, I like directing mime, and you never knew. I would just recommend that while you have the chance at uni.
Yeah, definitely would echo everything that all these guys have been saying. I also have a point, but I will just quickly also plug, if you're listening to this and you want us to clarify anything at any point, do just pop it in the chat, / if you come up with a question while we're speaking, also just pop that in the chat and we'll answer it at the end. And the thing I was going to say was, as well as everything that these guys have been saying about plays which are suited to Cambridge theatre, the other thing I would say is that it's really important to remember that if you're directing, it's not just you in the team, in that there are potentially many actors involved, a whole prod team, artists, designers, the producers, etc. And every single one of those people wants to give it their all. And for them, that's their entire world for like a few weeks, a month or 2 months or whatever. So, I mean, I'm coming at this from the perspective of directing my own script. But when I'm writing, something which I'm quite conscious of is that every single character in it has to have some sort of like moment to shine. There's like basically give the actor like things to do. Like if you're writing something or you're like adapting something, then like I think shows which make everybody feel like they're involved and that they're contributing something important is really important, because you don't want to end up creating the sense that it's like, oh, well, I'm the director and I'm doing this show which will make me look really good as a director and will like really improve my directing skills. And you don't want like, and at the end of the day, we all want to improve our directing skills and like do things which will make us look good as directors, but we also don't want to end up in a situation where it's like your cast and crew are a bit like, oh, I'm just sort of like executing orders, as it were, if that makes any sense. And I think in theatre, particularly in Cambridge theatre, just by virtue of how quick the turnarounds are, by virtue of how lovely everyone is, by virtue of how big and friendly the teams can be, like there is a high level of collaboration the vast majority of the time anyway. It's more pertinent for things like filmmaking, for example, and it's definitely can be difficult when you're, so as I mentioned earlier, I made a feature film when I was on my gap years, and that can be tricky when it's like film, there's much less room to be like collaborative and spontaneous and improvising on the day, and it's like, well, oh, we need you to stand there like with this specific lighting setup, and like, if you could deliver the line like this particular way because it like ties into this scene which we're not going to film for like 3 weeks, but trust me, it makes sense when you watch the film. That can be more difficult, and it's much more of like a tough balancing act as a director. But I think it's definitely something to keep in mind about bringing out the best in your cast and crew, and remembering that at the end of the day, it is very, very collaborative. Cool. Another good question. How do you structure rehearsals? In brackets, any specific programs? So for that part of the question, I would just say that your producer / prod team will often create something called like a when to meet or like a doodle poll, which is basically just a way to collect everyone involved in the production's availability, and then you structure rehearsals around that. And as we will stress throughout the evening, we are all students at the end of the day. Everyone's got like super topsy-turvy availability. We're also trying to do our degrees, and in many cases several shows at once. It's totally fine, and everyone understands because everyone is in the exact same position. But with regards to how to structure rehearsals, the rehearsals themselves, that I think is much more specific and individual to what kind of style you like as a director. For me personally, I tend to start rehearsals with like a warm up or like a game, and then we go into a read through of the scene that we're rehearsing. So that'll be like 1, 2, or 3 times, and each time I sort of like pick up on something that I want to like focus on. I was like, okay, well, like, oh, with that line, could you try reading it like this way? That kind of thing. And then once we've read through it a couple of times and sort of like honed on some specific points, so maybe like the lines and bits of the scene which are like most important for the scene to work, then we get into blocking. And then by the end of the rehearsal, hopefully you've sort of like gone through the scene in a holistic way. But I'll open it up to the others about how you guys structure your rehearsals when you're directing, if you have different methods or not. If anyone has any specific thoughts on that or not, that's cool too. Oh yeah, Jade, go.
I could say something quite specific about comedy, just because I feel like, just in case anyone is interested in comedy, if you're directing a comedy show, it's usually the writer performers that are writing their own material. So your job is to kind of like, I guess, like project manage all of their different sketches, and you're like fitting them all together, seeing what fits as like a cohesive show. And I guess, yeah, in terms of like scheduling all their time, there's often, for the show that I did anyway, it was quite a large cast. So splitting it up into smaller subgroups for like smaller rehearsals. I mean, I guess in a similar way that you would do like scenes, but figuring out like who's in what sketch beforehand, or who's doing what stand-up bit beforehand, and then calling them to rehearsals like kind of based on that. That's kind of how I worked best with them guys.
Yeah, definitely. Before we move on to another question, does anyone else have thoughts on structuring rehearsal? Yeah, Dixie.
Just from my experience, hopefully others as well, I hope I'm not just like actually just crap, but the students are just like, especially the actors in Cambridge, are just like chaos, like complete chaos. So I would just really recommend that you have contingency plans, or just like you get used to, you'll have actors text you like 5 minutes before a rehearsal and go, oh, sorry, actually I've got a meeting with my DOS, I can't come. And so you've got to always like be prepared to work around people being super annoying, and you just gotta like go with it, kind of. So I would really recommend, getting used to the idea that you might not be able to rehearse the scene that you wanted to rehearse that day. Actually, let's do this bit instead, and then we'll jig that around and do it like that. Yeah, you've got to have a bit of flexibility there, because if you don't, you will go mad.
Oh yes, go.
Yeah, it can be quite chaotic, but I think something that I try and do anyway is, like, in my head, work out like what time in the process do I want all scenes to be blocked, or like imagine yourself like, where do you want to be like 3 weeks before the show, 2 weeks before the show, 1 week before the show. And obviously those things can change, and like exactly, like someone could say I can't come, so that means that scene isn't done. But obviously you have to try and find a different time to fit them in for that. But I think in general, just like setting deadlines for yourself can be really useful, especially when everyone's moving around you. At least even if they're not stuck to, and like you're not perfect, and they really might not be, as long as you know where you want to be, and then just so leading up to the show, you're not like completely caught out because you realize that you really could have done this 2 weeks ago, and that would have made everything so much easier. So just like moving forward in that way, and kind of just taking it day by day, week by week, in terms of that, because things do change, and especially when term hasn't started, or when term does start, it can just get quite chaotic. But as long as everyone's like happy to be in the room together and like wants to do the rehearsal, and you get people who are like really passionate about it, and you are as well, it won't feel too much like a chore at times, and will just be fun. and that's why we all do it, I guess, as well.
Yeah, Phoebe.
Yeah, I was just gonna say something quite obvious is that work backwards from your show, when you want to run by, when you want it to be dressed, just like, so then you can figure out kind of what pace you should be going at. And also you'll like figure out your own systems of like knowing how on track you are. So like for LTM Guys and Dolls, there's like a cast of 22, there's like so many numbers and so many dances and so many scenes. So I literally had like a list of everything, and then I was like, when's it been blocked, when's it first rehearsal, can we run it through, can we sing it, can we dance it, and like red to green, like on how good that was going. To keep track of things. That's probably a bit of a chaotic way of doing it, but like that's something that would work for me, for example, just to like, because it can, a lot of the time as a director you can feel a bit like, oh god, I don't know what I'm doing, or like I'm not on track and you're the only one that's responsible. So it's kind of good to have mechanisms in there that reassure you. And I also had a list of like who was in every like tiny bit of scene. So if like one person didn't show up to rehearsal, I'd be like, you're in like a page of scene, the two of you, let's do that instead, just like really quickly as a resource. So I could just do that and we weren't like faffing about. It's also what's great about having an assistant director is that they can stand in for people. So always have a lot of those around, I would say.
Yes, yeah, agreed. And yeah, Jamie.
Phoebe's comment just reminded me of something that may be worth kind of mentioning and kind of expanding on, which is if it is a musical, so kind of like musical theatre. I mean, I'm speaking from my outside perspective. I have never approached anywhere near directing a musical in my life, and I'm critically tone deaf, so I probably couldn't. But it's basically kind of like a three. Phoebe, just correct me if I'm wrong at any point in this, but it's kind of like three different parts to it, as you'd assume. There's acting, singing, and dancing. So don't expect, basically, if you're interested in directing in terms of acting, but you're interested in terms of acting in terms of musicals, there's not an expectation that you need to know anything about dance or the singing aspect of it because you advertise for those roles. On the other hand, if you are interested in what is more like musical directing, where you're like, oh, I want to kind of look at that aspect of it, it's worth potentially contacting a society, which I'm just putting in the chat, which is Cambridge University Musical Theatre Society. I'm going to repeat the same joke that I said the other day, and Jade and Jasper are going to roll their eyes just to say that it has the most unfortunate acronym of all time. But yeah, check that. There's a contact page there, and there's musicals that are done, usually at least one every term. As Phoebe acknowledged, there's often one in Lent term called the Lent Term Musical, which is one of our biggest scale shows. There's the pantomime, and there's lots of original musicals as well. We're starting our season with Survival Strategies next week, and we have lots in late show slots as well. And we even have there can be smaller scale things in the playroom, and I'm sure Pembroke does like smaller things, and there'll be online musicals and things like that. So in the same way as Jade was like plugging comedy, I think it's always worth just mentioning these other genres as well, and like dance and all these other things.
Yeah, I completely agree with everything that everyone has just said. I absolutely agree on how it can sometimes seem chaotic, and that everything's falling apart, and that the importance of setting yourself deadlines and contingency plans, and also working backwards. And this was a point I made last night, but I'll make it again. Something which reassures me with the shows that I do, but also like every project you ever do in life, whether it's your supervision essay or a show, work backwards, as Phoebe said. And because fundamentally, if you're directing a show and you're running out of time, even then you know that you're not going to allow the show to go on stage if you haven't blocked everything. You know that it will be blocked, like somehow, some way or another, it will be done. And you know you won't allow yourself to go into a supervision without, well, maybe sometimes you're going without an essay or your work or whatever, but 9 times out of 10, you won't allow yourself to go in without having done the work. So if you start from that point of like, this will be done some way or another, it is much easier to then actually do it and find the time to do it. So like, yeah, like making contingency plans is really important, and just remembering this will be done. If like you had like a big rehearsal planned and suddenly things fall through, it will happen. I think I'll bring up the film again. It's slightly more relevant to this than the shows that I've done. In the shows I've done, I'm very fortunately have all gone relatively smoothly. But the film, literally every single day was probably the worst day of my life, in that everything went wrong all the time. And oftentimes it's stuff which is completely outside of your control. And some of the hardest, but one of the hardest things to get sort of like to grips with the directing is acknowledging that sometimes things do happen where it is outside of your control, and that can often be much more difficult than messing up when it is in your control. So like, for example, we were filming outside in a forest. I do not even know how much time we spent holding for wind or holding for a plane going overhead. Or maybe an actor missed their train, and suddenly you're like 45 minutes behind, and then you've got to work quicker. Like, I remember the morning of one really long day, one of the actors there, I mean, it was all my friends, but he nonetheless had an agent. Their agent had put them up for an audition for an ad, even though the actor had already said they couldn't do that day, but it was a big ad, so they had to go and do the ad. And then suddenly the whole schedule is like being rewritten and reconfigured as we go. And then another actor, also a job interview, just like dropped that morning. It was like, be here in like 2 hours. So, you know, sometimes these things like just do happen, and part of the responsibility of being director is just constantly being like, okay, that's fine, we will find a way to make it work. And in the end, it always does work. So that's some reassurance. Yes, Phoebe.
Yeah, sorry, just quickly, kind of a different thought, but this makes directing sound quite stressful, and it really can be. But I also want to say, as CUADC director, it is kind of my role to like represent directors, and also I'm here like for advice. So if you want to, you can email me, or you can shoot me a message on Facebook. Like, I've had things go wrong in my shows, and I know I've come out the other side alive. So I'm just here for like any advice if you want to chat over Zoom, I guess, or a cup of coffee or whatever. Just thought I'd plug that. Sorry.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, it's definitely not always stressful. It's just yeah. And as we said, like, we wouldn't all do this if it wasn't like the most fun and like thing ever. Like, we would, you know, we wouldn't do as many shows as we do. We wouldn't put in as much work we do if it wasn't worth it. And it always is worth it. And, you know, when you get to the end of a really busy term and you can say like, oh, I've, you know, done this, this, and this, and like, I didn't think I could do that, but it turns out I could. And, you know, it's really great to just like do these things and like these mad projects, and then like feel really proud at the end that you've all come together to produce this amazing thing. And even when it is really stressful, like in the example of the film, there was no better day than when I actually finished it and showed it to friends, and everyone was like, oh wait, that was a trouble production. I would have had no idea watching that. And I'm just like, phew. So, you know, even when it is stressful, it is always worth it in the end. Absolutely. Another question, to what extent should the director take into consideration the possible reaction of the audience when directing a play? Should it influence their decisions, or should the director follow their ideas entirely? I don't have any immediate thoughts. I'm not too sure. Jamie, yeah.
I think it's worth mentioning that the three main questions that are on the application form for shows at the ADC Theatre and Corpus Playroom is one, why are you passionate about your show? Two, if you're applying as a director, do you have any particular ideas of what is going to happen to bring it to the stage? So in casting, rehearsal process, and maybe how it looks, maybe we're not expecting you to be like a set designer or anything like that, but you may have visual ideas or you may not. And the third question is, what do you want your audience to take away from it? So that is a question there, and we're kind of interested in knowing. But that answer doesn't have to be cut and dry. It doesn't have to be, I expect everyone to think that. You know, obviously many shows and plays, you want kind of conflicting responses. You want like a combination of, you know, some people will laugh, some people cry, or like we want people to be split in division of which character they sympathize with. So, I mean, I am interested, and other people I think will, especially the more experienced directors, will have interesting interpretations of like ideas versus reaction. But I think theatre is so dependent on how people react, which happens throughout the process. Actors will have different interpretations from the directors, which you have to take into consideration when you have the dialogue of things. And then ultimately there's the audience, and the most interesting moment is if an audience member basically takes away a reaction which you weren't expecting, which can sometimes be a little bit, maybe you being like, that's not really what I meant, but then sometimes can be a humbling, like, oh, actually, like, I didn't consider it that way. But I'm happy for other people to disagree.
Definitely. Yeah, does anybody else have any thoughts on? Yes, Dixie.
So I think that something that's really worth remembering, especially while you're at university, is that obviously there's a massive crossover between theatre and sort of, well, I would say that, you know, a lot of mainstream theatre has a quite capitalistic, is that a word? Capitalist? I don't know. But it has a money-making model where you're selling tickets, and therefore you want to make a product that people A, want to come and see, and then B, leave and write glowing reviews about, which is obvious. That's a completely legitimate format for creating theatre, but it's also really important to remember that it's equally valid to create theatre that's not intended necessarily to, you know, be sort of liked or sort of make people feel warm and fuzzy inside. Some shows are really difficult to sit through. Some shows are completely and utterly bizarre and you have no idea what you think about them. Some shows are just, some shows might shock you, some shows might make you quite angry, but the point of theatre, I think, is for the audience to be an active participant in what's happening. Otherwise, you might as well just be watching a film. So I think it's really important just to not forget the validity of reactions other than sort of like the kind of, well, I don't know, positive ones are equally really, really important to have in theatre. So if you want to create a show that or you want to have a moment in a show that makes people feel really uncomfortable, obviously, you know, the right kind of uncomfortable, but if you want to create discomfort, then you should do that. Don't always worry about kind of like pandering to an audience. That being said, I also think a huge part of being a director is over the course, your job's not done on opening night. If you have an ADC main show, then you have 5 shows, or normally there's a matinee as well on the Saturday, but those aren't going ahead at the moment. But that's kind of like the amount of time that a professional show would have for previews, and they'd be redirecting the show, and often a show looks completely different by the end of that preview week than it will at the beginning. And obviously, you know, our shows don't then go on and run for months, but some do go off to Fringe, some do go off and do stuff at other theatres. But as a director, you watch the show every night, and you sit amongst the audience and you see how the audience reacts to what's going on. And I think the best directors are not afraid to tweak things after first night when they get a better idea of what the show looks like. And I think the ADC, I'm not sure if they're doing it at the moment, but I think the ADC actually reflects this process in the ticketing prices. So tickets are actually cheaper on the opening night. So it is actually, I think, which I think is a good thing, because it kind of formalizes that process of tweaking your work, which I think is one of the most important aspects of directing. So it was a really long and very like eclectic thing to say, but there you have it.
Jamie, are they cheaper on the opening night?
Not right now, unfortunately. The pricing got really, really complicated because of all the live streaming. What I can say is that everything got kind of flattened in a way. So there used to be a time, and it probably will return at some point, it used to be a time where opening night was cheaper, but then also Friday and Saturday were more expensive, and now we've like averaged it out. So actually, like, you should have it cheaper. And also streaming is only a handful of quid, so it's a little bit cheaper, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. Does anybody else have thoughts on how to? Yes, Phoebe, go.
Just in terms of like the director's ideas and being in conflict with the audience, like what I would say is, of course, you're going to have ideas about your show. You should have ideas about your show, but you have to be prepared to, like, I think anyway, to walk into your first day of rehearsals and not throw all that away. Maybe that's a bit of an exaggeration, but the more like preparation you do, and the more you feel you know your play, the more you have room to play, and the more like confident you will feel as a director to like be like, go like somewhere you never thought you'd go, because an actor's been like, actually I don't think that's what that line means at all, and you're like, oh yeah, wow, I feel free and confident to like follow that. And it's, you know, I think directing, and even though it's a bit of a weird slight hierarchy, is like such a collaborative role, because you're in a rehearsal room with other people, so everything you do is a collaboration. So yeah, that's what I would say about directors' ideas. Of course, it's important to have like a concept and, you know, your idea of what, but things will always spring up and your show will not end up how you first imagined it ever. And again, like kind of what Dixie said, it will change during that week of shows, even over like 5 nights. So I think just as a director, being really open is like honestly one of the best things you can be, because like ultimately when you like a show you make by yourself, just you, compared to a show you make with loads of other people, the one with loads of other people is always going to be better in my opinion, because it's got so many different opinions and so many different experiences on board. So yeah, that's all I'd say.
Nice. Yeah. Jade, I wondered if you could talk a bit about it from the perspective of adapting stuff, because if I'm right in saying Bottleneck was an adaptation, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. It's a play written by Luke Barnes, but then we kind of edited it and I added in little bits of things that like I'd written and stuff like that. And it became a bit of a verbatim piece, because I interviewed a lot of like my dad's friends who were like at the Hillsborough disaster and stuff like that, and then we kind of played clips of it like in between the scenes and stuff like that. So yeah, in terms of, so what was the question? Sorry, in terms of adapting it, what would you
so the question was, to what extent should the director take into consideration the possible reaction of the audience when directing a play?
Okay.
Yeah.
I'd personally say, in terms of like because obviously it's a sad topic what I was doing it about, I kind of didn't want to think too much about what the audience were going to react with, because I think that just made me get inside my head too much about it, because it was such like a topic that was so close to home. I didn't really want to think about what they were thinking too much, because like I don't know, because I feel like I was in quite a vulnerable position with it, and I didn't want, I don't know, the thought of people not getting it and not enjoying it and things like that. It kind of, yeah, it was a bit of a weird one. So I think if you're doing a show that's like really personal or has like themes that are quite upsetting, I'd say you're doing it for like yourself and for your prod team and for like whatever other reason, and don't worry too much about what the audience is going to think or say or anything like that. But obviously if you do have a particular like intention, then certainly go for it. But yeah, I tried to not get in my head too much about it. I just wanted to do the show.
Yeah. Nice. Yeah, something I would just quickly say is that again, approaching this from the perspective of a writer director, if you are going to be directing your own scripts, then that you can write your script with the audience in mind. If you want to, you can sort of structure it around that. I think depending on what the material is, I mean, for the panel show that we did, it was a sort of interesting juggle between keeping the audience in mind, but also keeping ourselves, the panelists and hosts, in mind. And our sort of motto was like, well, we basically did like just like loads of improv games as rehearsals, and that was the rehearsal. And our thinking was that like, as long as we're having fun on stage, then the audience will also hopefully be having fun. And in the end, it turned out pretty well. So in that sense, we were thinking less about, you know, oh, how will the audience respond? But then other times, like, again, I'll bring up the film. I sort of like, it was a story that I'd wanted to tell for a long time. And then as soon as I basically spent a very long time trying to write it as a short, and then had the dawning realization that, oh no, this is not a short, this is a feature film story, and I want to make it as a feature. And that was the starting point. But then it was also like, okay, it's really hard to say to people, do you want to watch 90 minutes of student filmmaking? Because sometimes the gut reaction would probably be like, maybe not. So for that, I was writing it with that in mind. I was keeping that in mind with regards to the structure and pacing and what came when and like how it was written. And in the end, I'd probably call it like a drama comedy. I'd say it's sort of like 30% comedy, and at some points I was like heightening the comedy, and at other points downplaying it. But yeah, I think it's really important to sort of like, if you have a vision and you can get people on board with that, to sort of try and execute that. But there's nothing better than when an audience is responding well to what you're doing, and particularly in theatre, that's the most amazing thing, that you can have people in the room laughing and, you know, cheering and stuff in real time. And yeah, I don't know if anybody else has any thoughts on that area. No? Cool. Awesome. Just got like a couple more questions. Okay, so we've sort of already covered this one, but I'll reiterate it. So like, what would be your advice for those interested in directing but with very little experience? I think just go for it, basically, is sort of the motto. Like, at the end of the day, you won't get directing experience without directing. And assistant directing, as we said at the beginning, is a fantastic way to just get in. And then if you rack up assistant director credits, then you can, and if you want to pitch to direct a show, then you can be like, look, I've already assistant directed these things, so, you know, you can trust me with it. Yeah, that's what I would say to that. I don't know if anyone else has any more things they want to say. Yes, Phoebe.
Sorry, can I just plug Freshers Plays really quickly? I'm just gonna just to say, I'd never like formally directed before I came to Cambridge. I sort of like led some sessions in my youth theatre, but I wouldn't have ever called myself a director. And then I went straight in and directed a late show, and it happened, and the show happened. So I'd really recommend getting involved. This is a link to a doodle poll where we're going to have a chat. We'll just come have a chat with me about directing, and then maybe you can get involved. So the positions are open for directors, producers, and ADs, and also you can apply for tech roles. Acting, I'd like really strongly recommend getting involved. It like gave me so much experience, and also like I met people who I'm like still friends with now. Yeah, that's what I'd say.
Yeah. Oh yes, Dixie. Yeah.
Also, just something to take into consideration is that some venues are better, I think, if you've got less experience working in theatres, to sort of work your way, well, not up, it's not a hierarchy, like every venue has its own amazing things to offer. But what I'm talking about is, like, for example, the ADC has quite an extensive things to think about as a director. You know, rigging, set, the workshop downstairs, and with COVID as well, there's various guidelines and things like this that might be quite overwhelming. And so if you want to put on some work, but you don't want to get into that stuff, I would look into some venues like the Fitzwilliam. No, not what's that college called? I'm next door to it.
Do you mean the Fitzpatrick at Queen's?
It's like.
You mean Fitzwilliam College?
Yeah, that is a college, isn't
it?
Sorry, I don't know where my head's at today. Fitzwilliam College has like a auditorium in it that's a good space. Corpus sadly shut at the moment, but that's another really good space, I think, for putting your ideas on its feet, but without the kind of you know, endless faff of doing, you know, all sorts of stuff with a massive team of people. If you want to start off smaller, I think that's a really good idea. And a good way of getting into that is through college drama societies. Get in touch with the Pembroke players. But also you will get lots of support from the ADC if you do want to do that. But yeah, I just thought it was worth mentioning that, like, I think there's a difference in the stress levels of directing something at, like, in a small studio space, and then on the main stage where, you know, there's all these things to think about, counterweight training and having lots of ASMs running around and get outs that last till like 4 a.m. and stuff. So yeah, I would think about that as well if you're feeling a bit nervous about getting started with that kind of thing.
Definitely. Cool. We've got 3 questions, quick fire questions. Also to say, if you've got something which you quickly want to ask, do just quickly pop it in the chat and we'll get to it. So what's a good path to directing play in a local theatre? I think, so the ADC is our local theatre basically. And then, as we've mentioned, there are all these other venues and societies as well. On the point of a local theatre, if you're watching this, I don't know if you've seen, but we've got a new theatre that's just opened up, which is also a pub, the Town and Gown Theatre. And at some point this year or next year, I'm not too sure which of the two it is, there is a student written production going on, which was originally going to be done in Cambridge, but couldn't happen because of COVID-19, which is going to be Dangerous Liaisons. That's either this year or next year, I'm not too sure. Next. Thank you. Yeah, so if you wanted to direct put on a show, but outside of the Cambridge Theatre circuit, which we're in, then I think definitely sort of seek them out, is what I would say to that. Another question, which is more about writing, how to best structure a piece of new writing, a pitch for a piece of new writing at the ADC, when to do it, and how things might change in the current COVID-19 situation. If you're still here and you ask that question, I would refer you to the writing panel that we did last night. But Jamie, I don't know if you wanted to quickly say anything regarding pitching.
I'm going to do something really embarrassing. I was so busy reading the questions that popped up on the chat, which were very rights focused. I missed what you said. I'm really sorry. Could you repeat it?
So the question was how to best structure a pitch for a piece of new writing at the ADC.
So I'm always quite reluctant to talk about like how to structure things, because I don't want to make anything too because I think everyone has a different approach and style for talking about things. What happens at the point that someone applies? They've answered those 3 questions that I referred to, as I'll repeat them again, which is why are you passionate about the show? What are your ideas of the process of bringing it to the stage? And what do you want the audience to take away? And we encourage you don't have to, but we think that's a framework you can use the 5 minutes to talk through your ideas. When it comes to new writing, we want to, as a panel, want to read the script for the show, which I was talking about this yesterday in the writing panel. Where possible, I would encourage for the show to be fully written, unless it is a show in which the devising of it and the creation of it is part of the process. So if it is a sketch show in which material is created together as a team, or if it is a explicitly devised show or experimental show, where that is part of the thing. But because it is all a very short turnover time, we don't want it to be a thing where it's like, I've written some of it and I hope to write it all in a week, because if there's one thing that students are very good at, and I have an anecdote related to myself as a student, is basically setting yourself impossible tasks that you can't do. And I once, while I was a student, tried to pitch for a show which I was adapting, and I thought I'd try and write it all in one night, and pulled several stupid all-nighters. And in the morning I was pitching the show, found out that the rights to the book had been bought by James Franco and Seth Rogen, so it all just went wrong. So like, long story short, have the script ready, and we're going to read that. So like, don't worry too much in the script about going through every beat of like what happens in the show. We kind of want to hear more about the general like sense of like, why is the show interesting? Why do you think it'd be like good to stage and stuff like that? And as a director, what ideas may you want to bring as a process to bring it to the stage, and what you want, again, the audience to maybe react to that, if that's right.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of rights, the 2 questions we just got are about rights and costs. So presumably most rights cost money, and presumably the ADC has only got a certain amount of budget. So what sort of limits will that put on choice of play? And is there an easy way to find out if material is still copyrighted or not? Jamie, you'd probably be best to answer this.
I am putting the 3 right holders. I don't have the websites immediately to hand, but you should be able to Google the 3 and find them as the first option. And if not, just email me. These 3 ones at the moment are the ones that we're encouraging people to remain to, because basically in correspondence with them, they've said that we are able to do things as a socially distanced theatre and also as a live stream. Rights is a real bit of a hassle, even sometimes when we think like it's listed on the website and we think it's available, they then turn around and say, oh, it's limited and we can't do it. I expect actually in a time like this, it might ironically be a little easier for Cambridge to get certain shows, because actually like, I don't know when like London Theatre is going to reopen and stuff like that, so there isn't quite as much of that like overlap. So basically check those websites and see what it says. It should quite clearly say amateur rights available, and it has a cost there. In terms of the cost, I don't want to get too much into the weeds of the whole funding thing, but basically you'll have heard a few times people talk about funding bodies, and that's how it works. There are these student societies that fund the shows and agree budgets and things like that. And in reality, we kind of know most of the time what the rough budget of performance rights is going to be, because the way that the rights holders calculate it is through basically seeing how big the venue is, and they're not going to charge you something that is like more money than the venue could actually conceivably make. So again, what I would say is if the rights look available, make the application. I can support and double check things, and don't worry too much about the money, because firstly, as I said, it's usually around the same value. And secondly, if it does reach a point where, which has happened once or twice before, where the show is actually, like I think we did something once in the Corpus Playroom, but it was like quite a big musical or something like that. So actually the rights were like prohibitively expensive, and there's like an emergency pot of money through the ADC you can apply to that we were able to use to fund that show. So again, that kind of, I hope, covers that answer.
Cool. And I think that basically brings an end to the questions. I think we've covered the basis, and as expected, we've gone for around 90 minutes, which is excellent. So I just want to say thank you so much to everyone who came to the panel and asked questions, and who came last night as well. And thank you so much to the panel for giving up their time and talking this evening. Particularly thanks to Jamie and Jade, who've given up 2 evenings in a row to chat about writing and directing. If anybody listening comes up with additional questions later on about writing or directing, please do feel free to get in touch. Writing is more my role, but I'm happy to answer any and all questions. Everyone's sort of like put their emails and society links and that kind of thing in the chat. I'll mention them. And at the end of the day, as we stressed, this is about students doing theatre, and we all want to help each other out, basically, and make the community even more fun and exciting and big and excellent than it already is. So yes, thanks everyone for coming, and have a good rest of your evening. This will come up on our YouTube channel sometime soon.
Thanks, Jasper.
Cool. Thanks everyone.
Thank you, Jasper.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks everyone. Good night.